Good evening, everyone. I am Victoria Prado. I'm Research Associate to the Founding Director at the Center on Global Energy Policy here at Columbia University. In our next and final panel, COP30, What to Expect, Ambassador André Correia do Lago, Secretary for Climate, Energy and Environment of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, will explore Brazil's preparation to host COP30 next year in Belém do Pará. The question everyone is interested in: what shall we expect from COP30? I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage Ambassador André Correia do Lago, Secretary for Climate, Energy and Environment at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Michael Stott, Latin American editor at the Financial Times. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and it's a tremendous pleasure to be here with Ambassador Correia do Lago, an old friend from Tokyo days. That phrase, top diplomat, is much used. In this case, it's absolutely appropriate. André is indeed a top diplomat on climate issues. His experience in climate matters goes back very many years. He's been Brazil's top climate negotiator before in previous governments, and he's leading the preparations for the COP30 in Belém next year. There's a lot of expectations around COP30, not least because the previous COPs, the ones before, have been in countries which don't have, shall we say, the dynamic civil society, the democratic credentials of Brazil. So there's a whole layer of debate in Brazil, a whole layer of excitement around the sort of civil society side. And of course, it's also a meeting that's going to take place in the Amazon rainforest, which has a very special and particular significance for the global climate. So there are many reasons to be excited about Brazil's COP30. André, it's a huge subject and one on which we could spend a whole day. We've only got 20 minutes odd. But if we perhaps start with the Amazon itself, forests, there's a great expectation around what Brazil might do in the way of a forest initiative at COP30. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to be back here at Columbia for this meeting, and I understand that there is lots of expectations regarding forests, and President Lula chose to do the COP in Belém because he understands that the world associates, when they think climate, Brazil, it's forestry. And the truth is that the very high proportion of our emissions come from deforestation. When the government of President Lula started, it was 50% of our emissions. It has already lowered more than 50%. But anyway, it's huge for us. So President Lula wanted somehow to bring everybody to Brazil at the place where, let's say, our biggest issue was, to show transparency and to show also that he wanted a very open debate about that. And I'm glad you mentioned the civil society, because for President Lula, it's going to be very important that civil society be very present and be very active. And in fact, we, since last year, when there was the summit of the Amazon countries, President Lula wanted to show that Brazil could really do something special about forests and for the forestry countries. There are almost 70 developing countries with tropical forests. And we started a group of countries that we are calling United by Our Forests, because there is a declaration that was signed in Belém. And we've been building an effort to discuss the issue of forest and the opportunities there are for the world, and mostly for countries, developing countries that have forests. What can they do with their forests? How can they receive support for preserving it, for restoring it? So there are many mechanisms, but there is a big confusion about it. There are many ideas, some are more or less serious. So I think that since we have very good science. We have very good academics in Brazil working on that. We have local governments. We have civil society. So I think that this movement called United for a Forest is going to be very active in the next year and a half to prepare for COP30, for Brazil to bring a very clear message on what we can do with forests and how forests can be seen not as a problem for climate change, but as an important solution for climate change.
And Andre, what do you think are the sort of secrets of trying to change this pattern of forest destruction, which has been so prevalent for so many years in developing countries? I mean, what's going to actually be the key to turning that around and not just slowing it, but actually stopping it? Because if we're going to meet these targets, the deforestation has to stop, doesn't it? It can't just slow down.
Absolutely, and we all agreed in Dubai to stop deforestation by 2030. So yes, this trend has been very impressive, and but you have to understand that there are very different circumstances according to the country and even the region, because in Brazil we have many Amazonic states inside Brazil, and they all have different challenges. So this is what I believe can be a great contribution, is to really recognize that there are very different circumstances and very different solutions according to the circumstances. But it is a worrying trend because technology at the same time helps us to understand what is happening in the forest, but technology also helps crime. So, and as you know, organized crime has been
this is a big
growing,
issue, right?
It's a
Really
very big issue in Brazil and in other countries. So there are very serious themes that have to be dealt with for us to be able to fulfill this pledge to end deforestation by 2030.
Right. And if we turn to another central topic in Belém, it's going to be financing the energy transition, and particularly financing it in middle-income countries, because broadly speaking, developed countries can mobilize the resources they need, the poorest countries can get concessional finance, but you've got this huge block of countries in the middle-income bracket, Brazil being a key one, which need to also mobilize enormous sums of money to finance the energy transition. So what kind of ideas can we expect from Brazil on financing the energy transition?
Well, Mike, that's exactly the challenge, I believe, that we have to think in the circumstance we have now, which is the urgency. Because I've been, as you said, a climate change negotiator for many years, but today the element of urgency is something that has to be much more absorbed and understood. And the middle-income countries offer enormous opportunities for investments, Indonesia, India, Brazil, and these countries really have to pay a very high price for any resources that they can get. So we have to add into the analysis of risk the alternative of not doing what we need to do before climate change becomes really even more alarming. So Brazil has started in the G20 now to deal with this issue very objectively, which is the finance for these developing countries that are in the G20. And we believe we can have this discussion. It will be quite interesting because we're going to have, after the presidency of the G20, we have the presidency of BRICS Plus. So this discussion will continue and then go to COP30.
But it's a very difficult one, isn't it? Because you need private capital, clearly, on a huge scale to fund this. But the private sector expects returns, expects profits, is going to look at it from a market point of view. And yet, as you said, there's an enormous urgency, but there's no market price mechanism to translate that urgency into something that's going to mobilize money, is there, at the moment? So how do you get around that problem?
Yeah, but I think that there is quite a consensus that we have to find something. Because you cannot, at the same time, pressure countries to do things because there is a climate urgency and not find the solution for the obstacles that these countries find to get finance. So I think that in the G20 we are advancing quite well in that sense, and I believe that next year will be a very, very important year to find answers to that. But it's, as everything that is complex, is not simple. But I believe that there are many good ideas that are being floated and that can be developed next year.
Tell us about some of them. What do you think are the most promising ones?
Look, we believe that the idea of de-risking, which is something that is discussed a bit vaguely, is something that if you succeed to put climate in the mainstream of investments, because the problem is that we're treating climate as if it was a specific thing. You're going to have a fund that is going to take care of projects that are going to take into consideration climate change. No, climate change is everywhere. You have to completely mainstream climate into investments and into what we call country platforms. Countries have to have a plan of development, a plan of medium and long term investments that incorporate already the climate element. And we believe that there is quite a consensus in the G20 regarding this. It's obvious that the countries where the investments are going to happen have to do many things, including rule of law, including many of the expectations of investors. But on the other side, if you really succeed to put the element of the urgency of climate change, we believe that we can have an impact on the de-risking.
Okay, and you mentioned urgency. I mean, I think 2023 is the first time over a 12-month period that the 1.5 degrees increase in temperature was exceeded on a 12-month period. I mean, how attainable is that 1.5 degree target now? Is it something we have to rethink? I mean, what's the thinking on that around COP30?
Well, Brazil's government is very keen on observing science, no? So we're trying to follow the best possible science, and the best possible science shows us that if we surpass 1.5, there will be some very strong impact on some elements that will affect mostly developing countries. In the case of Brazil, we know that if we surpass 1.5, according to scientists, some of the, for instance, the capacity of the Amazon to generate the flying rivers that now we know, thanks to the photographs of Sebastião Salgado, now that we see that they exist, that are the basis for the fact that most of Brazilian agriculture is rain-fed. So this has a gigantic impact on the most important activity of the Brazilian economy. So the idea of the 1.5 is that up to 1.5, you're going to have some consequences. Beyond 1.5, it's going to be much worse. It can be the savanization of the Amazon. It can have other very negative impacts on other countries. So somehow we have to have 1.5 as a reference.
You have to keep to it.
You have to keep to 1.5 and try to bring back to 1.5. But obviously we rely on science. And science, as we all know, this year is quite surprised by how quickly things are happening. And many scientists are saying that we are seeing now things that were expected in 2040. So we have to do what is possible with the information that we have now. And the information that we have now is that we should not surpass 1.5.
Right. And then thinking about Brazil's credentials in this area and about financing the energy transition, there's also, of course, the fact that as well as being a climate champion and a country with a very high proportion of electricity generated renewably, Brazil's also a significant oil producer. And it's currently the world's 8th biggest oil producer. If government plans are realized, it may become the 4th biggest oil producer. So there's a question, how does Brazil balance these two things? I'm sure it's something you're asked a lot at these conferences. How does Brazil balance being a climate champion and a more and more important oil producer?
Yeah, this is another thing that we had an important landmark in Dubai, is that countries have to transition away from fossil fuels. And this discussion is extremely important because you see that at the same time, oil will be probably necessary for some more years. So how do you manage who is going to be allowed to produce oil longer? No? And there you enter into a very important discussion for developing countries, which is the historic responsibilities of developed countries. So if developed countries could use fossil fuels for 200 years to be developed, who should be able to continue to use fossil or to provide fossil to the world as we decrease the use of fossil? So this is the big theme on those discussions on climate change now, is how will you deal with the fossil fuel that you will need even during the transition until we reach net zero that we expect to reach by 2050. So this debate is very important. I think that Brazil is having this debate internally. And I think most countries that produce oil should look at it in that context of climate change, in the context of urgency, and in the context that there must be some fairness in this transition away from fossil fuels.
Presumably we can expect some of that oil revenue to be used to fund the green energy transition.
Yes, as some people say, I mean, you can get finance for oil projects, you don't get finance for more sustainable projects, so you finance the sustainable projects with the revenues from the oil. So it is a tricky discussion, but a very important discussion, and it has to be a very open discussion because it's there.
And of course, there's the topic of conservation too, isn't there, which is a crucial one, because what's happened if we look at energy consumption patterns over the last few years, the world has been generating far more renewable energy, but it's also been consuming far more electricity, and it's forecast to continue increasing electricity use. So you're having to run faster and faster almost just to stand still, aren't you? I mean, how big a part of COP30 is going to be energy conservation?
Well, I think that there is also a mandate somehow that we should work in that direction. And I think there were many discussions here today, very interestingly, how Brazil can play also a role by being one of the countries that can increase enormously its production of energy in a sustainable way and somehow be a center for the production of sustainable products for the future. So this is an opportunity for Brazil, but also for other countries. But it's very interesting to see how many opportunities are being opened with the advances in technology, and we're talking a lot also about hydrogen. But we have to do everything much more quickly. I think that I know that I've used the word too much, but I will insist. Urgency is the word. We really, and if we believe in that we are going to have climate change in a much more intense way and much more quickly than we thought, we have to adjust our minds and adapt that to finance, adapt that to technology, to legislation. So we really have to work very fast, all of us.
And so thinking of that urgency, which I think we all share here, COP30 is also, I think, the deadline for countries to submit new nationally defined contributions, right, for their climate targets. What's your sense about how ambitious countries are going to be in their new NDCs at COP30? What are the signs so far?
Yeah, we are very much in favor of very ambitious NDCs. We're having the debates now in Brazil on our NDCs, and we believe that we can be even more ambitious than the first time that we submitted in Paris. But the truth is that there are no real incentives for countries to be ambitious. So we have to support countries in their ambition and not in somehow lots of cynical interpretations. No, let's have non-ambitious NDCs, and then if things change, we will be better than expected, but at least we will not do less than we promised. So I think that there is something missing to incentivize countries to be more ambitious, and we have to incentivize countries to be more ambitious.
And that's sort of related to another question I have, which is that you're a diplomat with very long international experience. We're living in a world which is much more fractured, which finds it much more difficult to reach agreements, where international institutions have become, in some cases, dysfunctional. And yet we've never needed more international cooperation than now. I mean, do you think climate can be an issue that can unite the world, that can start to heal some of these enormous divisions that have opened up in the last few years? How do you sense the kind of diplomatic climate around this?
Yeah, I still believe. That's why I can have my job. I still believe in it, but it's not necessarily totally rational. But but the alternatives, all the alternatives we have, are bad. You remember before the Paris Accord, people were saying that the alternative was the Wild West. And somehow it's a good definition. So cooperation is definitely necessary. And I think that without this effort, although I understand very well the frustration of many people that no, it's never happening and progress is slow, etc. But without this effort every year, I am absolutely sure it would be worse.
Well, I think, there's obviously a very clear need for urgent action, and thank goodness that you're keeping the faith, André, and still very much, the driving force to try and make sure that COP30 is a huge success. We're out of time. We'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much.